The last clause that we have in SQL is something called the having clause. And the having clause is very similar to the where clause, except where the where clause filters out rows of data based on column values, the having clause filters out groups based on aggregate functions. And we'll see that in just a few minutes. Again, with every new clause, I want to introduce the general form so we can see how everything combines together. So we have our select clause, our from clause, our where clause follows that. I'm just going to say where some filtering condition. We have the group by clause, group by some column name or multiple columns. I'm going to put a space. Then we have the order by clause. We'll say column name, ordinal, or alias. And the fifth clause that we write, which immediately follows the group by clause, is the having clause. The having clause is very similar to the where clause in both its usage and how we type it out syntactically. The difference is that instead of saying having some column with some comparison operator, so having, say, first name equal to this, we're going to say having some aggregate function with some comparison operator applied, meeting some criteria. So with the having clause, we'll say things like having the sum of total due greater than 1 million. So a subtle difference that you have to keep in mind is that the where clause filters out rows of data based on column values, while the having clause filters out groups based on aggregate function values. So let's take a look at an example. Let's write a query that finds for each territory how many sales did they do in the year 2006. So I'm going to say select star from sales.salesorderHeader, call that SOH. I'm going to inner join to the sales.sales territory table so that I can see the territory name as opposed to just the territory ID. I'll call this ST. We're joining on the territory ID columns within each table. And I want to limit my set to only those orders that were placed in 2006. So I say where order date between 1/1/2006 and 12/31/2006. Now I wanted to see the total sales by territory, so I'm going to say select st.name as territory name, and then the sum of total due column as total sales 2006. Now I need to group by the territory name, else my query will fail. And let's just order by 1, or order by the territory name. So when I execute this, now I see for each territory what was the total sales for just those orders that were placed in the year 2006. But suppose I only wanted to return those territories that did at least $4 million in sales. How would I do that? The having clause, again, filters out groups, which in this case is the territory, since we're grouping by the territory. So the having clause filters out groups based on aggregate functions. So if I wanted to find only those rows, or only those territories, that did at least $4 million in sales, I can say having sum of total due, our aggregate function, greater than 4 million. And when I execute this, I only return the 3 territories or the 3 groups where this condition was met, where the aggregate function, the sum of the total due column, exceeded 4 million. So let's take a look at another example. In the production.product table, we have this product subcategory ID column. Suppose I only wanted to return those product subcategories that had at least 15 products within that subcategory. To do that, we're going to join from production.product, and let's just do an inner join, so exclude all the null product subcategories. So we're going to inner join to production.product subcategory, call that PS. We're joining on the product subcategory ID in both tables. Now I want to return the subcategory name, which is in the PS or production.product subcategory table. We'll call it as subcategory name. And I want to find the number of products associated with each subcategory. So to do that, I can use the count function. I'm going to say count of star as product count. Now if I run this, I'll get an error because I haven't grouped by the subcategory name. So now I say group by ps.name, and I'm just going to order by 1. So this particular subcategory, bottles and cages, has 3 products contained within that subcategory. But again, I only wanted to see those subcategories that had at least 15 products. So at this point, we're not filtering rows of data, we're filtering groups. So that's our cue to use the having clause. So now I'm going to say having, what's our aggregate function that we're filtering on in this case? The count of star, or the product count, and we want it to be at least 15. So I say greater than or equal to 15. And now, when I execute this code, I only return those subcategories that had at least 15 products categorized in that subcategory. Not to be redundant, but this is an incredibly important difference. The where clause filters out rows of data based on column values. The having clause filters out groups based on aggregate functions. So you'll never say where count of star or where sum of something in the where clause. It's always going to be in the having clause. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at a few more examples and then wrap this section up.